So for stock valuation, we have the following ways to value a share. The first one is the zero growth model. Now, what that means is that the dividends are not going to change for the remainder of the life of the stock. Zero growth means 0% is the growth of the dividend, the G. So there is no change in the dividend. If it's $2, it's $2 forever. If it's $5, it's $5 forever. And usually preferred shares are the ones that pay a dividend that doesn't change. So what we call that also is a perpetuity. So another word for a zero growth model is that it's a perpetuity. Perpetuity, okay? That's the other word for a zero growth, a dividend that does not change. The constant growth model is where the G is going to be constant. So if a stock grows 5% per year forever, that's a constant growth. If it's growing at 2% per year, it's a constant growth. So the dividend is actually increasing as a constant growth. With the perpetuity, the dividend does not change. It's the same amount forever. A variable growth, the dividend changes. It is not constant, it is not zero. Every other year, it's different. So, for example, it could be paying the same, a zero growth for a few years. Then it could be increasing for a couple of years, decreasing a little, increasing a lot, decreasing, and then grows at a constant growth. So it's a variable. It changes for a couple of years. It's not going to be the same. It's not a zero growth and it's not a constant. It's variable. Okay? Now, all these three models are for stocks that pay dividends. Okay? Now, what if a stock does not pay dividend? Then we go to the PE ratio valuation model, and we'll talk about that at the end. So those three are for the stocks that pay dividend and how we value them. The PE ratio is for stocks that do not pay any dividends. The first one we're going to look at and do calculation is the zero growth model. The first thing we're going to look at is the zero growth model, which we said is the dividend is going to be the same. It's going to be the same forever, infinitely, and therefore it's a perpetuity. It's the same dividend repeatedly over time. And this is a unique condition for preferred shares. Okay, preferred shares are the ones that usually pay a perpetuity. So when we ask you to do a valuation and we say it's a preferred share, okay, you know that preferred shares pay a dividend that is the same forever, and therefore they pay a perpetuity. Okay, now we taught you in time value of money how to value or get the present value of a perpetuity, which is the future cash flow or the cash flow because it doesn't change over the required rate of return or the discount rate. For the zero growth model, it is the same. It's the dividends. Why did I write dividend? Dividend. Okay, it's the dividend divided by the required rate of return. Okay, again, the present value or the value of the share or the price you're willing to pay for a share is going to be the dividend it pays in perpetuity divided by the required rate of return. Let's do an example together. So let's look at this example of a zero growth model of how to do the calculation. So you have an investor that wants to buy a preferred stock that pays $5 in dividends annually. Her required rate of return is 10%. What is the value of the preferred stock? Okay, so again, the preferred stock pays $5 in dividends and her required rate of return is 10%. The formula to calculate the value or the price of the preferred stock is dividend divided by the required rate of return. So what do? Simply, you would take the dividend, which is the $5, divided by the 10%, you would calculate this. How much do you get? $50. Okay? So that would be the price of the preferred share, or the value of it to her, or how much you would pay for it. Okay? So simply, you take the dividend, $5 in dividend annually, divided by the required rate of return, which is 10%. 5 divided by 10%, or 0.1, you know that 10% is 0.1 as decimal, that would equal $50. And that's how you would calculate the price of a preferred share, or a zero growth for dividends. Okay, a dividend that grows at 0%, which means it does not change. That would be the formula. So now let's look at number 2, the constant growth model. Okay, the second model we're going to look at. Now, it's got alternative names. You might see them called constant growth model, or the dividend discount model, or the Gordon growth model. They are all the same. Do not get confused. Okay, Gordon is the person that came up with this model, and that's why it's named after him sometimes. Now, what this model says that the dividend that is being paid grows at a constant rate, 2% per year. Okay, now how does that look like? So it's going to look like that the dividend grows at a constant rate. It's no longer a zero growth where it's a straight line and the dividend doesn't change. It's going to change, but at a constant rate, which in this example is 2%, could be 5%, could be 10%, whatever it is. As long as it's a constant growth, the growth rate is the same per year, it is called the constant growth model, and we use a formula that looks like this. Okay? What this formula says is that the value today, or the price of the share today, should be the future dividends, what we're expecting to get in the future. So notice dividend 1 and price 0. That's very important to notice, okay? So it's the next year dividend that we're going to get that's going to give us the price today. So D1 is the expected, or the next dividend that we're going to receive. Why do we discount that? Because the previous dividends that was paid out, we didn't receive them, so it has no value to us. So we need to discount a future, something that we're receiving in the future, to know the price of it today. Okay? So very important to make sure when you're calculating, when you're using this formula, it's D1, not a dividend that was paid this year or last year. It's the next dividend, expected, or the next dividend. Divided by the required rate of return, which is R, minus the growth rate, which is a constant rate that has been given to you, or that you need to calculate. Once you have all of these, then you can calculate the price. Now, if sometimes they give you the price and tell you to calculate one of the other variables, it's simple to do as well. So let's do a few examples. So let's continue with the constant growth model. This is an example taken from the model, question 710. Let's look at it. So if we had these dividend paid in those years, and we want to get the price of the share based on these dividends, we know per the model that we need dividend, the next dividend, D1. If I want D1, that means I need to know the next dividend. To get the next dividend, I need to know the growth rate. Otherwise, how do I know by how much it's growing, right? So for me to be able to know the growth rate, we go back to the basics of looking at the future value and the present value formula. If we do that, we remember that the future value equals the present value times 1 plus R, the rate to the T. In this case, how many years do I have? I need to put it here. And then the R is what I need to calculate, the growth rate here. I have the present value and I have the future value in order to get the rate of the growth to be able to calculate the next year. Now, to simplify this, I need to put them on a timeline. This clarifies to me what the T is, because we can see 6 numbers. However, the T is not 6. Why is that? Because remember, the PV, when I calculate it, it gives me the P at time 0. So let's look at it this way, okay? So I drew a timeline for you here. So if I put the dividends at the timeline, this was the 2018, and this was the 2023, and that's the 2024 that I need to find. So remember 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, right? Okay, and that's the next one I need to find. So let's do a quick calculation. As a reminder, the formula is FV equals PV times 1 plus G to the T. If I want to do that for the dividends, okay, it's gonna be dividend 5 equals dividend 0, 1 plus G to the what? 5, okay? Because when I discount this to times 0, that's what I'm gonna get. Does that make sense? Let me repeat that again, okay? Why is it 5 over here? Because when I use this formula, the PV is always here. When I try to calculate something that's in the future, bring it to the present, it's always the present at time 0. Okay? So something that's in year 5, when I discount it, it's at time 0. However, in this case, I know what it is at time 0 and I know what it is at time 5. I need to find the G, or here it was previously the R, not to confuse you. It used to be the R. But for dividend, it's the growth rate, and that's what I need to find. Okay? So it will be 2.87 equals 2.25 multiplied by 1 plus G to the power of 5. Okay? Let's continue. How do I get G? I need to divide both sides by 2.25. Okay? To get rid of it. So if I'm going to get rid of this, because I divided both sides, I'm left with 1 plus G to the power of 5. To get rid of this, I need to take the square root 5 from both sides, so I can get rid of this 5. And now what is it? 1 plus G equals this. So to get rid of the 1, I need to subtract 1 from both sides, and that will equal G. Okay? So this is how we can get the growth rate. It's the square root of the dividend over here divided by the dividend at time 0, square root the number of years minus 1 to get the G. When we do this calculation, we find that the growth rate is 5%. Okay? So take a few minutes, pause the video, do the calculation, and see what you get for G. So now that we found G to be 5%, we need to calculate the next dividend. So back to our future value, present value formula. Okay? This time, I'm going 1 period, so 2.87 multiplied by 1.05, the 1, this is the 1, 5% is 0.05, okay? It will equal 3.01. That is the next dividend, and this is the number I'm gonna put here for D1. It's 3.01. The R, it's given in the problem that it's 13%. Once I have all these numbers, I can put them in and I'll calculate them to get the price. Pause the video, do your calculation, then check your number. So once you do your calculation, if you put the dividends that you received, 13% minus 5% is 8%. I just divide $3.01 divided by 8%. My answer is $37.60. Okay? So that should be the answer you would get for this problem. Again, if you have a constant growth, this is the constant growth model. It's the next dividend. If you're given dividends, you always have to calculate the expected, the next one. How do we calculate the next one? We need the growth rate to multiply this by the growth rate to get the next dividend. How do I get the growth rate? I do this calculation whereby I see the number of years, put it on a timeline, and put the oldest at time 0, okay, and see what are the number of years that you need to discount by over here. This would be the number square root of the last dividend divided by the first dividend minus 1. That will equal your growth rate. Okay? So let's look at the last growth model, which is the variable growth model. In this model, the dividend growth keeps changing. So some years it's at 16%, as in this case scenario, then it's at a constant growth at 3.2, and another case could be 0 for a couple of years, and then it grows for 20%. I mean, whatever it is, it's variable, it keeps changing, it's not constant, and it's not a 0 growth rate. So in this case, we have a dividend that will grow by 16% per year for 2 years, then will grow at 3.2% per year forever. So it's a constant growth after that. So for 16 years, it's going to grow, sorry, for 2 years, it will grow at 16%. And then after that, it will be a constant growth at 3.2%. The required rate of return is 10.5. And the last dividend, or the company just paid a dividend of $1.20. Okay, now as we said, if it's paid it's not D1. D1 will be the next dividend. Okay, so we put this at time 0, and then we need to calculate for 2 years the growth at 16%. So let's come over here. So we have it at time 0, the dividend that was paid at $1.20. So we said the growth rate for the next 2 years is, the growth for the next 2 years is at 16%. In order for me to get the next dividend, I need to multiply by 1.16. Why? Remember, it's the future value. Okay, we go back to our original formulas, it's the same. The rate is 16%, 1 plus 16% to the T1 is gonna get me the growth in year 1, okay? So it's going to be 1.39, try that. And we said, again, this multiplied by another 16% growth, so 1.16 is gonna give me 1.61, $1.61, okay? After that, the growth was given at 3.2% constant growth rate, okay? Recall here, it's 3.2%, okay? After the 16% for 2 years, after that it's 3.2 forever, which means it's a constant growth. So if we multiply $1.61 by the constant growth, which is 3.2, so it'll be 1 plus 3.2%, so 1.032, we get that the dividend in year 3 is 1.66. Okay, do pause the video and do try these. You need to get these dividends. Now, we know that this is a constant growth. Our formula for a constant growth is D1 over R minus G. Okay, so it's always discounts from 1 to 0, so a 1 period. In this case, it's D3. So when I discount it, it's going to give me the P at time 2 over here, because it discounts for 1 period, right? This is a discounting formula. It discounts for 1 period. When it was price at time 0, It was D1. But now I'm discounting D3, dividend 3. So it's going to give me the period right before. It's going to discount it to here, P2. Okay? So let's do that. And we're going to get P2 here. All right? So what is it? It's going to be, sorry, I can move that around. 1.66 divided by R minus the growth rate, which is 0.32. What was the required rate of return? It was 10.5. So 10.5 minus 0.32, 166 divide. Do that calculation and put that in P2. So what I got was $22.74. Okay. Okay, so I cleaned up the board a bit. So now what is it we want? We have these two dividends that we calculated, and we have the price where it should be in year 2. But we need the price today. So I don't need this anymore. I used it to get the first one. I also don't need this anymore. But I need to discount the future cash flow that I'm going to get here and the future cash flow that I'm going to get here, the dividend plus the price of the share over here due to it being a constant growth afterwards. So I add these two and discount them and get a price over here. So remember, how do we discount from the future value to present value? I divide by 1 plus R to the power of T. In this case, the required rate of return was given at 10.5%, if you remember. So 1 plus R is 1.105. The T is 1. Over here, 1 plus R is 1.05, and it's squared. T is 2, okay? When I do these calculations, I will get the discounted rate over here, and then I will add them to get the price of the share. So when I do this calculation, let me get another pen. 1.39 divided by 1.105. So the discounted is 1.26. These two added together, discounted, I will get 19.94. If I add these two together, then I will get that the share price should be $21.20, and that is my final answer. So the final answer will be this over here. The value of this share should be $21.20 due to the variable growth. So for the final valuation method, what is the PE ratio? This is calculated when we do not have dividends. So what happens is that you are given a PE ratio for your industry sector and you are given the earnings per share for your company. So in this case, if the PE ratio is 2.5 times and the company's earnings per share is 10.5, what is the share value? Very, very easy and very straightforward. We just multiply them together. So you would multiply the 2.5 multiplied by 10.5, and that would equal 26.25. So it's very easy, very simple. The formula is the PE ratio multiplied by the earnings per share. That will give you the value of the share or the price of the share. Okay? This covers all 4 valuation methods, and hopefully you will be a pro at calculating valuation of stocks.